Let's welcome in Ross Coulthart, a NewsNation special correspondent, investigative journalist. Of course, you know him as the host of Reality Check. Ross, really appreciate you making the time on this. And this is such a perplexing case. So many questions here. What is standing out to you the most about the general's disappearance?
Well, hi, Natasha. The thing that worries me most of all is the question, does the general not want to be found? I know some people are pointing towards possible suicide, but I was happy to see in that report that Alex clarified that there's no evidence the general was suicidal, and his wife has actually spoken very highly of his mental capacities. And friends of his who travelled with him, they tell me that a week earlier he'd actually cycled 60 miles. So this is not a man who was at the end of his life, somebody who was contemplating possible mental incapacity. He wasn't suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. There doesn't seem to be any motivation for suicide. I do think we have to ask now the possibility of foul play. Is there somebody who has interceded to take the general out of the picture? He was a man with some of the most sensitive US military intelligence secrets in his head, especially particle beam technology, and as Alex acknowledged, he was involved in abortive attempts prior to the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump election campaign in 2016 to negotiate with John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, about, believe it or not, UAP transparency. There was a discussion underway in which General McCasland was involved. It's a matter of public record now that his emails were part of emails being circulated where it was being discussed that Hillary Clinton, as president, would be making a disclosure about UAPs. And as we know, the disappearance of General McCasland closely follows the announcement by President Trump that he will, and he has pledged to do this, be making a disclosure about UAPs, extraterrestrials.
Yeah, absolutely. We know McCasland worked for several government programs, including the Global Positioning System, or GPS, the Space-Based Laser Project Office, the Air Force Research Laboratory, just to name a few. Do you think any of his positions made him a potential target? And also, we saw in that report, the Russians once hacked his email. I mean, what do you make of his wife saying no one would be interested in 13-year-old secrets? Do you agree?
Well, certainly his wife made the point that there's been no change in his security clearance since 2013. But what that obscures is that since he left the service of the US Air Force, he's been working with a private military contractor that has been directly involved in particle beam technology research. It's very common for people like the general, very senior military officers with extensive knowledge from their military service, to go into private service. And he's been very heavily involved in secret programs that are part of special access programs with the US and intelligence departments, which frankly are still ongoing. So the idea that somehow his knowledge is dated or obsolescent doesn't hold. He is an extremely important military figure with incredibly important secrets inside his head, and his disappearance, I know for a fact, is an issue of grave concern to people at the highest levels of the Pentagon.
Okay, appreciate all of that context. And Ross, separately, internet sleuths are speculating after the White House apparently registered the internet domain aliens.gov. What do you make of this? What are you hearing? Could there be a big announcement coming soon?
Natasha, this is such a fun story. It's a great tease from the White House, because one thing that happened when Defense Scoop, an online magazine, followed this up with the White House press office, they were sent back an emoji of an alien face. So the White House is having fun with it. It could be that the White House is maybe talking about aliens in the context of non-citizens, and maybe they're about to do something for the midterm elections that talks about their record on immigration. But we are being told, I noticed Anna Paulina Luna, Representative Luna, and Representative Tim Burchett in the last day or so have both emphasised that Donald Trump, the president, is very serious serious about UAP disclosure and that he is going to follow through on his pledge made on Truth Social a few weeks ago, just before the General's disappearance, that he is going to declassify and be more transparent on the UAP secrets.
Yeah,
held
may
by
it
the
be
US
so.
government.
Ross, with the 30 seconds we have, you recently got to see something amazing. These alleged mummy specimens that some say could expose our current theories about UFOs. I saw on video, Ross, you entered with a ton of skepticism about this. Were there any major findings in your eyes?
Look, I think, Natasha, the only way to resolve the mystery of these objects, they certainly look real, but some very good skeptical debunks have raised serious questions about their authenticity. And I think this needs to be properly tested independently and objectively, and that's what we're recommending. We've suggested an independent university team do the work under the supervision of the Peruvian government.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.